Identity theft, the system to destroy your hope. Identity theft, the system to destroy your hope. I'll say it again. Identity theft, the system to destroy your hope. I want to start off by blessing our Alahayim. I want to start off by saying Barakatah, Tawadah, Nada, Shakha, Hasham, Yahweh, Alahayim. Barakatah, Tawadah, Hasham, Yahweh Shai, Ha, Mash, Yak. Tawadah, Yada, Shakha, Rawak, Alahayim. Identity theft, the system to destroy your hope. When you don't see and know your value, you allow others to define it for you. I'll say this again. This is a revelation that the Most High God has given me when I began to teach this lesson, identity theft. All right. When you don't see and know your value, you allow others to define it for you. I want to turn your attention to an article from the Houston Post, or should I say the Houston Daily Post, Negro Who Can Write Hebrew, September 20th, 1897. It says, he is deaf and dumb and comes from an African town. Now, I want to make this clear. Where you see where it says deaf and dumb, that is not making a mockery of this Negro. What it is telling you is that this Negro, this young Negro, was born deaf, right? He was born deaf, which means that he never heard sounds and he never formed any type of words coming through his mouth. He's never articulated a single word through his mouth. Okay. So that's what this means, that he was born not able to hear, which means that he's never formulated a single word. All right. So it says he is deaf and dumb and comes from an African town. It goes on to say a young African Negro has been in this city for the last few days who claims to be a Hebrew. He is deaf and dumb and as black as the ace of spades. Now, where you see where it says as black as the ace of spades, again, this is not making mockery of this individual, but it's to highlight here that this person, this Negro, is not mixed, making it clear that this Negro, right, that he is a dark, melanated young man. Okay, so it goes on to say he carries a pad of paper with him and answers all questions by writing them in Hebrew and Lashkin Kodesh. Now understand, when you see Lashkin Kodesh, right, that is basically saying the holy language. All right. So in the Paleo is actually pronounced Lashan Quadash. All right. Lashan Quadash. OK, but nevertheless, it says here by writing them in Hebrew in Lashkin Kodesh. What excites the most wonder is that he writes Lashkin Kodesh very rapidly. In other words, it's saying that he's very fluent with writing this language. All right. It says it is the language of the books of Moses and is made a special study of, spoken and write with ease only by the rabbis and highly educated Hebrews. Okay, so this is letting you know that this is very unusual in their eyes. Okay, it goes on to say the Negro was sent to one of the rabbis in Hartford, Connecticut, who is perfectly satisfied that he is a Hebrew. Okay, now this is 1897. It's saying that these rabbis all came to the conclusion and agree that this young Negro, this young man, is a Hebrew by blood. All right. Now it goes on to say here in this article, he says, referring to this young Hebrew, right? He says that he came from a large town in Africa where there was a tribe of about 20,000 black Hebrews who speak Lashkin Kodesh and are quite prosperous. So now this young man, right, is bringing to the attention of this newspaper, right, bringing to the attention of those that are interviewing him that there are 20,000 black Hebrews from his tribe that speaks Lashkin Kodesh, in other words, Lashon Quadash, and it says that they speak it fluently. And then it goes on to say that he says that they are quite prosperous, okay? Now, he goes on to say in this article, this is his quote, he also says that his father is a rabbi in that town. That is why his father took the trouble to teach him to write these languages, which needed an extra amount of labor on account of his being deaf. In other words, in the account of this young man not being able to hear. So his father had to put more time into really teaching his son this holy language, how to write it, okay, how to communicate in this language. So it goes on to say, he says his people not only write Lashkin Kodesh, but it is their speaking language as well. He left home a few years ago, and there they give him clothes, food, and money. What surprises him, he writes, is that no Hebrews knows of his countrymen in Africa. I'll read it again. What surprises him, he writes, is that no Hebrew knows of his countrymen in Africa. Okay, now when he says no Hebrews, what he's referring to is who? Not the Jewish community as we know them. He's referring to what? All the Hebrews here in America, saying that the Hebrews that he's come in contact don't have a clue that his countrymen exist in Africa. All right? Hidden in plain sight. Okay? There is a lot of landmarks that many of us don't know exist here in the United States. Landmarks that will confirm who we are, that will confirm our identity. Now, let me give you one of them. This right here is an article, right? This is the website from First African Baptist Church, Savannah, Georgia. All right. This is a church that my great uncle pastor, James Wesley Carr. All right. This church was built with the hands of slaves back in 1773. So let me give you some information of what it says here. It says the pews located in the balcony are original to the church. These pews were made by slaves and are nailed into the floors. On the outside of the pews are markings written in the African dialect known as cursive Hebrew. All right. So why is this important? Well, when you understand the history, right, of the Hebrew language in terms of when you learn in the modern Hebrew, right, they would tell you that the Hebrew language was lost. So this language, all right, supposedly, right, resurfaced, right, by Eliezer ben Yehuda. He is referred to as the father of modern Hebrew, who helped to resuscitate a language that was supposedly a dead language. But how is it that these group of slaves is writing a language at least 100 years prior to the revival of a language that is dead? And they're writing this language 100 years prior, right? Here's another bullet from this historical landmark, is that it tells us that the ceiling of the church is in the design of what is called a 9-patch quilt, which represented that the church was a safe house for slaves. 9-patch quilts also served as a map and guide, informing people where to go next or what to look out for during their travels. All right. So this church was very instrumental with the Underground Railroad. The more heritage is made universal, in other words, Catholic, or generalized, so will the increase of creating blank spaces and filling them with constructs and descriptors that contradict it. All right. Now, here's another quote. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. That is a quote by Charles Caleb Colton. Now, as we progress in this presentation, tell me if you really flattered. Tell me if you really feeling, a sense of flattery once you realize truly who you are. I want to start off by asking this question. What is heritage? What is heritage? Mawar Shah. I'll say it again. Mawar Shah. Okay, what is heritage? Now, let's deal with the biblical definition of heritage first, because I'm going to show you how to articulate what heritage is based upon the scriptures, and then we're going to use secular resources to confirm it. All right? So, the biblical definition of heritage, Mawar Shah. Mawar Shah. All right? Mawar Shah. Heritage. So let's go to Genesis chapter 10. Barashayat Ashar. All right. Let's go to our foundational scripture here. Genesis chapter 10. And I'm going to use Genesis chapter 10 to properly teach you how to articulate heritage. Let's deal with the sons of Japheth. All right. This is Genesis chapter 10, verse 2. And it says, the sons of Japheth, Yapath, in other words, Bani Yapath. In other words, that is the pronunciation of the sons of Japheth. So it says this, the sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, Tyrus. All right, verse 3, and the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz. Now, you notice I have this particular name bold. All right, I have it highlighted. So make a note of this name because you're going to hear this name again. Ashkenaz, all right? And Riphath and Togarmah. Verse 5. By these were the isles of the Gentiles, divided in their lands, Aratazah, everyone after his tongue, Lashan, after their families, Mashpachah, and their nations. Let me read it one more time. By these were the isles of the Gentiles, divided in their lands, Aratazah, everyone after his tongue, Lashan, after their families, Mashpachah, and their nations. Now, my next question, was Japheth Quadar? Was Japheth Quadar? First, let me give you the definition of the word Quadar, all right? This is coming from the Strong's Hebrew and Greek in-depth definitions dictionary, all right? Quadar. It means to be ashy, dark colored, all right? By implication, to mourn, be black or blackish, be or make dark or darken, All right. So that's what this word means. But I want you to make a note of the primary meaning of this word. It means to be what? Ashy. It means to be ashy, dark colored. All right. So this is a primitive root word. Okay. So quadar, to be ashy. All right. An example, dark colored. So let me give you the visual of what this means. Okay. So let's go to Jeremiah chapter 14, verse 2. It says this: Judah mourneth Abal, in the gates thereof languish Amal, they are black quadar unto the ground, Ra Tazah, and the cry of Jerusalem is gone up. Let me read it again. Judah mourneth Abal, and the gates thereof languish Amal, they are black quadar unto the ground, Ara Tazah, and the cry of Jerusalem is gone up. Now, Jeremiah chapter 14, verse 2 is describing Judah's physical appearance during a famine. Now, let me give you an illustration so that way you can really get a visual of what this is saying. So you can see exactly what it means to be quadar. In other words, ashy black or ashy dark. Right here is a picture, right, of some melanated people in the Sudan, right? They, at this time, were dealing with a famine, right? No water, no food. And you can see that what? They are still dark. They are still melanated, right? But you notice that their skin has an ashiness to it. So that's what it means. And this is a visual of what quadar actually means. Okay. Now, let's go back to the scriptures so I can give you proper clarity so you understand that this is a famine. Okay. Verse 3. And their nobles have sent their little ones to the waters. They came to the pits and found no water. Mayam. They returned with their vessels, Kalai, empty. Rayaquam. Verse 4. Because the ground, Adamah, is chapped. Kata. For there was no rain in the earth. The plowmen were ashamed. They covered their heads. Now, my next question, was Japheth Shakawar? All right. So what does Shakawar means? What does Shakawar means? Or Shakar, that's modern. But what does Shakawar means? All right. Let's go back to this reference here. Let's go back to the Strong's Hebrew Greek in-depth definitions dictionary here. This is what it says. It means to be dim or dark, be black. It tells us that this is a primitive root word. All right. So nevertheless, to be dim or dark, it means be black. Okay. So was Japheth Shakawar? Was Japheth Shakawar? And I'm going to tell you, he was. Japheth was a melanated man. Japheth was a Shakar, all right, or Shakawar, right, man. This is coming from the dailymail.com, all right. This is an article titled, Europeans were dark-skinned until 8,000 years ago. Paleo complexions were brought to Europe from the Near East, studies claim. All right. Here's a few bullets here from that article. I'm not going to read the full article, but let me give you some bullets here. It says here, it has been at the root of division and persecution for centuries. But it seems that the white skin of most modern Europeans did not evolve in Europe at all. Now, genetic research has revealed that ancient European populations were dark-skinned far longer than had originally been thought. The BBC News, all right, an article titled DNA Secrets of Ice Age Europe Unlocked. Let's see what they say. Some of the earliest arrivals on the continent contributed little to later populations, but between 37,000 years ago and 14,000 years ago, different groups of Europeans were descendants from a single founder population. It goes on to say this. Analysis of genes carried by the Ice Age Europeans shows, among other things, that they had dark complexions and brown eyes. Only after 14,000 years ago did blue eyes begin to spread, and pale skin only appeared across much of the continent after 7,000 years ago, borne by early farmers from the Near East. Early European populations possessed more Neanderthal ancestry than present-day people, consistent with the idea that much of the DNA we inherited from the Neanderthalers, or should I say the Neanderthals, had harmful effects. Scientists think this inheritance was progressively lost via natural selection. It goes on to say this. The Arignatians, a 35,000-year-old male from Goyet, Belgium, belonged to a distinctive branch of the Ice Age population. DNA was extracted from the upper arm bone of the hunter, who was associated with the Arignatians' archaeological culture. So let me give you more information on the Arignatians. All right, let me give you more information on this group. Prehistoric Man and His Story by Professor G.F. Scott Elliott. Okay. Page 161, it says, the Arignatians found the Mousterians or Neanderthaler in France, and during all the changes sketched above, the former seem to have held their own in that country. After the Worm Ice Age, the Arignatians modified their weapons and mode of life, and after the theory which we have adopted, all right, goes on to say, became the men of La Magdalene. These Arignatians and their Magdalenian descendants pervaded all Central and Southern Europe. Their remains have also been discovered in Valletta, in other words, Malta, in Phoenicia, and elsewhere, as we shall try to show later. But during this long period of time, two other races also, right? And it goes on to say this, we have seen that the Arignatians was originally an African. Wait a minute. We have seen that the Arignatians were originally an African. And if he traversed North Africa on his way from Egypt and Mesopotamia, it would have been a very remarkable fact if he had not come in contact with the African pygmy or his ancestors, for the Bushmen, Wambatu, and the other pygmies are the oldest. All right. Now, page 162, right, says this. Moreover, since the discovery of this burial, characteristics skull of the same Negroid affinity have been found in Spain. All right. In Brittany of Neolithic date at Sierra, in other words, not earlier than the 13th century, in Sardinia at Astorf, and perhaps in Caithness. All right. But I want you to pay attention and make a note of what's highlighted in red. It says characteristics, or should I say characteristic, skulls of the same Negroid affinity have been found in Spain. All right. Now, the original Europeans, the descendants of Japheth, were Shakar or Shakawar people. They were dark melanated people originally. Okay. Now, more on Japheth, more on Japheth. Let me give you more information on Japheth. This is coming from Genome Biology and Evolution. All right, Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. All right, so Aaron Elhake, a geneticist at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, thinks so. In a recently published article, or should I say, in a recently published study in Genome Biology Evolution, Elhake, 2012, he is calling for a rewrite of commonly held assumptions about Jewish ancestry. Instead of being primarily the descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel, present-day Jewish population are, finds Elhake, primarily the children of a Turkish people. Let me read that again. Instead of primarily being the descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel, present-day Jewish populations are, finds Elhake, primarily descendants of a Turkish people. He goes on to say this, who lived in now what is called Russia, north of Georgia, east of Ukraine. This civilization, the Khazars, converted from tribal religions to Judaism between the 7th and the 9th centuries. So let me give you some more key points about the Ashkenazi Jews. Yes, the Ashkenazi Jews, right? That is exactly what Aaron Elhake is highlighting, right? So let me give you some more key points about the Ashkenazi Jews. This is coming from the Los Angeles Times, an article titled DNA Ties Ashkenazi Jews to Group of Just 330 People from the Middle Ages. All right, now here's a highlight from this article. It says, so says a new study in the journal Nature Communication. An international team of scientists sequenced the complete genomes of 128 healthy Ashkenazi Jews and compared each of those sequences with the others, as well with the DNA of 26 Flemish people from Belgium. Okay, so in this article, as you see, they're letting you know that what? A DNA test was made of 128 healthy Ashkenazi Jews. Okay, let's see what else this article says. It says their analysts allowed them to trace the genetic roots of this population to a founding group in the Middle Ages. Ashkenaz. Wait a minute. Didn't I have you highlight this name? Right, in the scriptures that we made reference to, Ashkenaz. So Ashkenaz means what? German. So if Ashkenaz is the son of Gomer, which is ultimately he's the, the grandson of Japheth, right? So that means that Ashkenaz, as we see here, in Hebrew refers to Germany. Then that means that the Ashkenazi Jews, as we know them, are descendants of a Germanic origin, ultimately Japheth. So it goes on to say here, Ashkenaz in Hebrew refers to Germany, and Ashkenazi Jews are those who originated in Eastern Europe. All right, now let's go to Revelations 3:16. It says this, so then because thou art lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth. All right. I want you to pay attention to that word lukewarm, though. Make a note of lukewarm, because I'm going to show you that there is nothing good, as we see with the scriptures, about being lukewarm. All right. Which leads me to this Hebrew word, Thayakan. All right. Thayakan. All right. So there's nothing good about the middle, right? Lukewarm. There's nothing good about being caught up in the middle. Nothing good about Thayakan. All right. Now let me give you proof. Let's start with the Middle Ages. Thayakan Yawam. Middle Ages. Let's go to the Oxford Dictionary to define this term, Middle Ages. It says, the period of European history from the fall of the Roman Empire in the West, 5th century, to the fall of Constantinople, right? Or more narrowly from the 10th century to 1453. All right? The earlier part of this period, the 5th century to the 11th century, is sometimes distinguished as the Dark Ages. The reason why it has this distinction, or this been labeled the Dark Ages, as far as this particular block of the Middle Ages, is because this is the time that the Moors ruled Spain. The Moors ruled this territory. Okay, so that's why they refer to it as the Dark Ages. All right, so it goes on to say, while the later part from the 11th century to 1453 is often thought as the Middle Ages proper. All right, I'll read it again. While later part, all right, the 11th century to 1453 is often thought of as the Middle Ages proper. The whole period is characterized by the emergence of separate kingdoms, the growth of trade and urban life, and the growth and power of monarchies. Now, let me turn your attention to another reference, which is Slavery and the Catholic Church, 1975, page 52 and 53 is what I'm going to highlight. Okay? Papal grants to the kings of Portugal, giving authority to enslave the Saracens and other non-Christians of West Africa with whom Christendom is at war. All right, 1452 through 1514. In 1442, a Portuguese captain brought to the Gold Coast some Moorish prisoners of war, exchanged them for 10 Negro slaves, and brought these back to Lisbon. A trading settlement was established at Lagos by 1444. It would appear that by 1452, the Portuguese were anxious to establish their property rights over this newly discovered West African territory. And so Pope Nicholas V was approached and was apparently led to believe that these territories of the Guinea coast were inhabited by Saracens and other enemies of Christendom. There is no other explanation of a series of papal documents which applied the well-known contemporary rules of war to the situation in West Africa, whereas the Portuguese, right? So in a nutshell, you see that this is highlighting the first transatlantic slave transaction. All right. And as you see, you have two groups here, actually three groups. You had the Portuguese. They were at war with the Moors. Remember what I said about the Middle Ages coming out of the Oxford Dictionary, how the Moors were at war, how the Middle Ages were called the Dark Ages, and how the Moors ruled that all of Spain, that whole territory, for almost 900 years. But nevertheless, right? So the Portuguese were at war with the Moors. They had prisoners of war, right? And so there was an exchange that the Moors, right, traded 10 Negroes. This is important. So the Moors are referred to who? Muslims, right? Melanated men who were Muslims, right? Who had slaves, Negro slaves. And so they traded 10 Negro slaves for their, in exchange to have their prisoners of war released by the Portuguese. All right. So that triggered the slave trade. That triggered the transatlantic slave trade. All right. So Moors is designated to who? The to the Muslims, right? To the dark melanated Muslims who had enslaved the Negroes, right? Who were not Muslims, who were pretty much foreigners, right, to certain territories of Africa. Okay, so with that being said, So when you understand the term Moor, and this is another thing I want to highlight real quick as we progress here, you understand Moors. The Moors teach that they are descendants of Moab. The descendants of the Moabites. Well, that's pretty significant. Why? Because when you say that they are descendants, or when they say that they are descendants of Moab, well, Moab is the son of Lot and his daughter, right? From having what? Practicing incest. They had an ancestral encounter which produced what is referred to as a bastard seed, which is the Moabites and the Ammonites, right? So that is truly what it means to be a bastard child, not a single mother with a child as we've been made to believe. Actually, it's what? A child that's produced out of incest, all right? But nevertheless, we're well aware, the Portuguese were well aware, the local Negro inhabitants were not Saracens, were not Muslims, and were not the enemies of Christendom. In 1452, Pope Nicholas V addressed a brief to King Alfonso V of Portugal, which included the following words. All right. So I'm not going to give you any more information on that. I encourage you guys to do some more research and get the full documentation, get the full document so you can read it in its fullness for yourself. But nevertheless, let's go to another term, right? Let's go to another term. Thayakan Darak. In other words, the Middle Passage. Thayakan Darak, the Middle Passage. This is coming from PBS, the Middle Passage, all right? The Middle Passage, the 16th century through the 18th century. It says, for weeks, months, sometimes as long as a year, they waited in the dungeons of the slave factories scattered along Africa's western coast. They had already made the long, difficult journey from Africa's interior, but just barely. Out of the roughly 20 million who were taken from their homes and sold into slavery, half didn't complete the journey to the African coast. Most of those dying along the way. And it says, and yet worse was yet to come. And it goes on to say again, and the worst was yet to come. This is just the first leg, right? The first leg of the transatlantic slave trade. Just the first leg, all right? So let's highlight what it said in this text. It says, they waited in the dungeons of the slave factories called baraka. Now, I want you to make a note of this word, baraka, right? The word coon comes from this word baraka, all right? Let me give you the etymology of the word baraka, or should I say coon rather. All right, coon, short for raccoon, all right, 1742, and American English, right? It says it was the nickname of Whig Party members in U.S. as the raccoon was the party symbol, and it also had associations with frontiersmen who stereotypically wore raccoon skin caps, which probably ultimately was the source of the Whig Party sense. All right, but let's go further here. Let's go further. The party's 1840 campaign was built on a false image of wealthy William Henry Harris as a rustic frontiersman. The insulting U.S. meaning black person was in use by 1837, said to be from Barak Coon, right, by 1837, all right, from Portuguese baraka, which means what? Slave depot, pen, or rough enclosure for black slaves in transit in West Africa, Brazil, Cuba. Let me highlight that again. Portuguese baraka right? That word coon comes from the Portuguese barraca, which means it's a slave depot, pen, or rough enclosure for black slaves in transit in West Africa, Brazil, and Cuba. And this is an example. So for those that are using this insulting term to describe your brothers and sisters, regardless of how upset or how much you may disagree with their actions, that does not give you the okay to refer to anyone with this term here, this very degrading term. This is where our ancestors, this is the storing area that our ancestors were crammed up into this place right here. All kinds of diseases came out of this. This is clean right here. But can you imagine having 50 plus slaves crammed up into something like this? Heat, right? Sickness, all inside this place. Can you imagine that? And I encourage you guys to do more research and do more, get more of an understanding of what our ancestors went through during this first leg, during the transition going from the first leg of the transatlantic slave trade to the second leg. Just this right here. Okay? Now, let's go back to this article real quick. PBS, the Middle Ages. It goes on to say this. The captives were about to embark on the infamous Middle Passage, so called because it was the middle leg of a three-part voyage, a voyage that began and ended in Europe. The first leg of the voyage carried a cargo that often included iron, cloth, brandy, firearms, and gunpowder. Upon landing on Africa's slave coast, the cargo was exchanged for Africans fully loaded with its human cargo. The ship set sail for the Americas, where the slaves were exchanged for sugar, tobacco, and or some other product. The final leg brought the ship back to Europe. The slaves were branded with hot irons. Understand that. Let me reiterate this. The slaves were branded with hot irons and restrained with shackles. Their living quarters were often a deck with the ship that had less than 5 feet of headroom. And throughout a large portion of the deck, sleeping shelves cut this limited amount of headroom in half. Lack of understanding headroom was the least of their worries. This is what they use to brandon our ancestors. This is what is called a fleur de lis. This is a fleur de lis. Many of you guys see this symbol on the New Orleans Saints. You see this symbol in the NFL. You see it all around you. Many of you don't even realize what it is. You'll see this symbol all through the Catholic Church. You'll see a lot of these symbols, right? On designs on gates, fences, or whatever. But nevertheless, this is a fleur de lis. This is what they used to what? Brandon our ancestors with. And also, they will also use this to what? Cut the hamstrings of slaves that what? Tried to run away. They will use this to castrate slaves. Let's deal with another middle, all right? Remember, I said there's nothing good about what? The middle. Now let's deal with another middle here, all right? Thayakan Quadamath, all right? Thayakan Quadamath, which is what? The Middle East. Let's deal with the Middle East here. Let's deal with the Middle East. This is coming from an article, the New York Times, all right? The title of this article is How the Middle East Was Invented. Yes, the Middle East was invented, all right? Let's see what it says here. Until this century, nobody talked about the Middle East because neither the term nor the states in the region existed. Both were the works of the victors in World War I, the true begetters of the furies that still rage. All right. The term Middle East was coined by, or should I say, coined in 1901 by Admiral Alfred Thayer Mahan, the celebrated American advocate of naval power. It was popularized in speeches in 1916 by Sir Mark Sykes, a British member of Parliament. The initial designer of the Middle East was Britain's redoubtable war minister, Lord Kitchener, who proposed indirect colonial hegemony relying on indigenous kings and emirs to carry out British wishes. Okay? So there's nothing good about the Middle East. Now, let's deal with the modern Jew. All right? We still tying in with Japheth. All right? Let's deal with the modern Jew. Let's deal with the modern Jew. Here's images of the modern Jews, all right? Ashkenazi Jews, okay? Here's another image of modern Jews. But you see here, you see what? You see Asians here, okay? You see Orientals there. But then we see Ethiopians here, right? We see Kwadar people here, or should I say Shakawar people here. How is this possible? How is it that all of these different people, right, are Jews? How can they all be Jews and yet they look completely different? I'm going to give you some highlights from a book titled The Origin of Ashkenazi Jewry, The Controversy Unraveled by Jits Van Straten. All right. Let's highlight a section here titled Genetic Distances. All right. Genetic distances. It says, all right, a large part of the study was devoted to the determination of genetic distances between the different populations. Through this method, genetic markers from different Jewish populations are compared. The smaller the relationship, the more differences in DNA may have arisen. Such differences are called distances. All right. So 75 Caucasian, in other words, white populations based on 9 markers. The genetic distances analysts showed that East European Jews were closest to the inhabitants of Thrace, the region shared by Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. Bulgarian Jews came next, followed by 36 non-Jewish populations. And only then the second Jewish population, the Iranian Jews. Other results showed a large Italian component in the gene pool. In other words, total variety of genes in a population. Of the East European Jews, from all these results, it appears that genetically, the different Jewish communities do not have much in common. Wait a minute. They just said what? Genetically, the different Jewish communities do not have much in common. Often they appear to be more related to the population in the midst of which they lived when its genetic materials was available. So this is basically saying that each group that we see of Jews are what? Converts. They are converts. This explains why they look what? According to whatever region that they are in, they what? Take on the appearance of those that are in that region. The question should be, well, if that's the case, how come we as Negroes who was descendants of slaves, how is it that we were scattered all around this world, but we were still able to maintain, for the most part, our appearance from the antiquities? How is it? We've been raped by every community, every single community around the world. See, many don't know that the slave trade extended to Asia. Asia purchased slaves. It went as far as to India as well. And the country, India, the country, they had slaves as well. all around this world, people benefited, countries benefited from slavery, benefited from the transatlantic slave trade. All right. So let's highlight a quote here again. Genetically, the different Jewish communities do not have much in common. Often they appear to be more related to the population in the midst of which they lived. In other words, converts. Okay? So I know I spent a lot of time on Japheth, but now let's deal with Noah's son Ham, or Ham. This is coming from, again, let's go back to Genesis chapter 10, verse 6. The sons of Ham, or Ham: Cush, Kawash, all right, and Mizraim, all right, Matazah, Ra, Yam, and Phut, Pawat, and Canaan, Canaan. Verse 20. These are the sons of Ham, after their families, Mashpakath, after their tongues, Lashan, in their countries, Aratazah, and in their nations. All right, I'll read it one more time. These are the sons of Ham, after their families, Mashpakath, after their tongues, Lashan, in their countries, Aratazah, and in their nations. All right. Here's another reference, right? The Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary. Now, this is one of the references that many Christian apologists will try to throw out, right? This is one of the references that they try to attack, right? As if this was written by us. Page 213. The definition of Ham. It says, the youngest son of Noah, born probably about 96 years before the flood. One of the 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites. Let me repeat this again. The youngest son of Noah, probably born about 96 years before the flood, and one of the 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites. All right. Now, let me give you another reference. All right. Let's go to the Young's Compact Bible Dictionary. Let's go to page 255 and how they define Ham, or Ham. It says here, a son of Noah and father of Cush, Egypt, Put, Canaan. And it goes on to say, see further on each of these 4. But it goes on to say this, while they may have all been dark-skinned, they were not the forefathers of the Negroid races, but rather of people associated with Egypt and the north of the continent of Africa. Let me just highlight a quote again. It says, while they may have all been dark-skinned, they were not the forefathers of the Negroid races, but rather of peoples associated with Egypt and the north of the continent of Africa. So I'm just giving you 2 more references. That's telling us that what, right? Remember, there's a distinction between Negroes and also the Moors. So the Negroes, right, the slaves that came here on those slave ships, is telling us that what? We are not descendants of Ham. All right? So it tells us that what? Ham, right? It says that he is the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes. All right? He is the progenitor of the Shakawar races or people, not the Negroes. All right. Now, I want to highlight one more thing here. Let me give you a little bonus information here. The Watusi Giants, right? This is an article I wanted to make reference to real quick. It says here, a bullet from this article, the Tutsi Giants of Central Africa, Giants of Palestine. It says, it has been said that these giants are born 6 feet tall, and when you walk among them, you can believe it. Men towering 7 or 8 feet are a common sight. Women gain height by having their heads bound in conical shapes in infancy, then training their thick hair to grow straight up to add a few inches. All right. This is what else it says about the Watusis. It says the Watusis are black, but they are not Negroes. Wait a minute. The Watusis are black, but they are not Negroes. The spectacularly tall, slender, and statuesque tribesmen are a proud Hamitic or Nilotic people who migrated to Rwanda, Urundi, over 400 years ago. That's what it's saying there. So nevertheless, it says that what? Those Watusis are not Negroes. So are the Negroes, are we blood descendants of Ham? I'm going to say absolutely not. All right. Where did this teaching originate? Where did they get all these teachings that we are descendants of Ham? Where did this teaching originate? I'm glad you asked. Let's go to the Talmud Mas Barakoth 58b. It originated with the Jewish community as we know them, the Ashkenazi Jewish community as we know them. This is what it says here. It says, on seeing pock-marked persons, one says, blessed be he who makes strange creatures. An objection was raised if one sees a Negro, a very red or very white person, a hunchback, or a dwarf. So what it says here, when it says a Negro, you already know what that means. A very red or very white person. Now they're saying a light-skinned Negro or an albino, right? Someone that's a Negro but has what? No pigmentation in his skin, or a hunchback or a dwarf. In other words, that's where you get into short far as pygmies. Hunchback means what? Deformed. You know, many of that is because of the lack of what? Nutrition. But nevertheless, right? In this text, it refers to everyone that's specified here as being what? Strange creatures. All right. It goes on to say here, on seeing an elephant, an ape, or a long-tailed ape, one says, blessed is he who makes strange creatures. All right. Now let's go to the Talmud Mas Sanhedrin. All right. 108b. Let's see what it says here. It says, our rabbis taught 3 copulated in the ark, and they were all punished: the dog, the raven, and Ham. The dog was doomed to be tied. The raven expectorates his seed into his mate's mouth, and Ham was smitten in his skin. And this is from the footnote. It says, from him descended Cush, the Negro, who is black-skinned. So the Ashkenazi Jewish community, as we know them, are the ones who came up with this doctrine, came up with this teaching that all Negroes are descendants from Ham. All dark-skinned people, far as outside of Japheth, that is, all right, are descendants from Ham. Okay? So let's deal with Shem since we're right here. Noah's son Shem. In the Paleo, it's pronounced Sham. All right? Let's go to Genesis 10:21. It says, unto Shem, or Sham, also the father of all the children of Eber. All right? Banai Abar. All right? Banai Abar, children of Eber. The brother of Japheth, the elder, even to him were children born. Okay? Now I want to take you to a piece of history here. I want to take you to a map here. Some of you guys may have seen this map, but this is coming from Princeton University, 1710 map. All right. Let's deal with this map here. Let's see what this map says. Well, let's see what this map reveals, because you have other universities that utilizes this map. You'll see it in Northwestern, Stanford, but I'm going to purposely utilize this map right here. And I'm going to tell you why. And you're going to see here, right? You see right here, you see where it says Negro land. Let's highlight that. Let's enlarge that. You see Negro land, okay? All right. Now you see what? Guinea. All right. Now within Guinea, you see the slave coast. You see a territory that says Ouida or Faida. Well, we know Ouida is the Portuguese pronunciation of Judah. And if you study the Paleo Hebrew, you know that their Paleo pronunciation of Judah is Yahawada. All right. But nevertheless, let's delve into this. I want to highlight a particular writing on this map here. It says, and this is written in Old English, so you'll see there's a reason why it's written a certain way. It's going to be hard to read. If you haven't read Old English before, it can be kind of challenging to read because you'll see here as I read it here. It says, I am credibly informed that you see the Y, but actually a country of about 100 leagues north of the coast of Guinea is inhabited by white men, or at least a different kind people from the blacks, who wear clothes and have a use of letters, make silk, that some of them keep the Christian Sabbath. Now, there's some red flags here if you really pay attention here. So this writing here, this is a forgery. This was handwritten on here, and I'm going to prove it. Why? Why is it such a discovery to come across a group of, according to this document here, the writing here, white men, right, living in a particular territory, and that they are what? Wearing clothes, and they have use of letters. They can write, and they keep the Christian Sabbath. So when they say the Christian Sabbath, this is saying that they have Sunday worship, not the seventh day of the week's worship. So let's delve into this. Let's pick this writing apart. And I'm going to give you another piece of information that will completely obliterate this information here. All right. Now, this is coming from African and its Inhabitants, Volume 2. Okay. It says here. All right, we're going to highlight page 175. I'm going to give you a couple of bullets here. It says, Saracos, in other words, the Sonic people, the Jews of West Africa, but unlike them, right, are chiefly wholesale dealers carrying on a large caravan between Sierra Leone and Timbuktu. And this is an image of the Saracos, in other words, the Sonic people, the Jews of West Africa. You see how they look? You see how they look. You see their appearance. All right. On page 267 of this book, it says, east of Great Popo begins the Dahomey territory, guarded by the important town of Glewe, known to the Europeans by the various names of Faida, Havida, or Heveda, Wida, or should I say, Wida and Ouida. Let me read it again. East of Great Popo begins the Dahomey territory, guarded by the important town of Glewe, known to Europeans by the various names of Faida, Hevida, Wida. It goes on to say, the old writers called it Judah. All right, I'll read it again. The old writers called it Judah, and its inhabitants were said to be Jews, while the neighboring river Alala, whose real name is Ephra, became the Euphrates. Okay, now let's see what else we see here. It says, a part of the local trade is in the hands of the Mavumbis, a people of grave and solemn aspect with intelligent eyes, straight or even alkaline nose, whose pronounced Semitic type has earned for them the Portuguese designation of Judeos, Preton, or Black Jews. They may certainly be regarded as of Jewish origin, if the statement be true that they are strict observers of the Sabbath, abstaining even from all conversations on that day. This is not referring to the Christian Sabbath. This is referring to the Shabbat, the seventh day Shabbat, which many refer to as Saturday, right? The seventh day of the week, which begins on the eve, right? From the evening to evening. In other words, which would be 6 p.m. in the evening on Friday, 6 p.m. on the evening of Saturday. So that is the actual Shabbat. All right. So we just debunked the writing that's on the map. This is coming from the Department of State Archives. All right. This is the words of Harry Kissinger, who served as the Secretary of State for Richard Nixon. All right. This is what he says. The Igbos are the wandering Jews of West Africa, gifted, aggressive, westernized, at best envied and resented, but mostly despised by the mass of their neighbors in the Federation. Wait a minute. So we just highlighted the Saracos or the Sonic people. We highlighted the Dahomey people. We highlighted the Movumbas. Now we're highlighting the Igbos. Wait a minute. So far we identified 4 tribes, right? 4 tribes in that territory in which on that map gave the impression that there are white men, so to speak, right? Remember, that's what it read. These white men who wore clothing and honored the Christian Sabbath, right? That's what it said on that map. So far, we just completely debunked everything that's on that map, okay? Now, let's further debunk. Let me give you some more information here. Let me further prove to you that the Negroes are not descendants of Ham, all right? Crania Aegyptica. Samuel Morton, who is a professor, page 66, all right? Crania Aegyptica, Samuel Morton, MD, page 66. This is his observation on Egyptian ethnography. This is him doing research on over 750 craniums from the catacombs of Egypt. Let's see what he says here. All right. This is on page 60. And this was written back in 1844. It says it will follow that upwards of 10 million of Negroes have been brought as bondsmen into Egypt. Wait a minute. It will follow that upwards of 10 million of Negroes have been brought as bondsmen into Egypt. It goes on to say this. Negroes were numerous in Egypt, but their social position in ancient times was the same that it is now, that of servants and slaves. That's on page 66. So Dr. Samuel George Morton further confirms who the Negroes is, who we are. All right. Now, I want to bring you to another understanding here. You guys heard this term, one drop of blood. All right. 1 drop of blood. All right. 1 drop of blood. All right. Y'all heard that term, right? So 1 drop of Negro's blood. Let's see what it says. This is coming from an article, PBS, Who is Black? One Nation's Definition. This is what it says. This definition reflects the long experience with slavery and later with Jim Crow segregation. In the South, it became known as the 1 drop rule, meaning that a single drop of black blood makes a person a black. It goes on to say this. It is also known as the 1 black ancestor rule. Some courts have called it the traceable amount rule, and anthropologists called it the hypo descent rule, meaning that racially mixed persons are assigned the status of the subordinate group. All right. So let's go to Exodus. I said all that to say, let's go to Exodus chapter 6, verse 25. All right. It says here, and Eleazar, Aaron's son, took him one of the daughters of Putiel, to wife. And she bare him Phinehas, Pa, Yana, Kas. These are the heads of their fathers, the Levites, according to their families. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 3. And this man went up out of his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice unto the Lord Yahweh of hosts in Shiloh. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, Payana, Kas, the priests of the Lord, were there. So let's define Phinehas real quick. This is coming from the Eastern Bible, 1897. This is what it says about Phinehas. It says, Phinehas, mouth of brass, or from old Egypt, the Negro, son of Eleazar. Wait a minute. Let's stop right there. We don't have to go further. It says Phinehas, mouth of brass, or from old Egypt, the Negro. Okay. See, in the Hebraic culture, guess what? Names have meaning, right? So we know that what? Phinehas means what? The Negro. Okay. So this name was popular among the Levitical priests, thus giving us even more proof that Israel, right, are Shakar people, right? So was Esau a Caucasian? Let's tackle this all together. Was Esau a Caucasian? Let's go to Genesis 25:25. We're going to nip this in the bud as well. It says, and the first came out red, Ad Mawanai, or Ada Mawanai. I'm saying it in both ways. All right. All over like an hairy garment, and they called his name Esau, Ashar. So the first came out red, Ada Mawanai, or Ad Mawanai, came out red. Well, what does this mean? All right. That word means rosy, red, ruddy. Okay. This is coming out of the strong Hebrew and Greek dictionary of in-depth definitions. Let's go to the Webster Unabridged Dictionary, 1913. Let's see what it says about ruddy. It says this: of a red color, right? Red or reddish, as a ruddy sky or a ruddy flame. All right. Then it goes on to tell us of a lively flesh color, or the color of the human skin in high health. Make a note of that: color of human skin in high health. Now let's go to the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, 1915. Let's see what it says here. All right. It says this: ruddy is the form taken by the adjective red when used as a term of praise of the human skin. And this is its use in the Bible. The Hebrew and Greek words are all usual words for red or to be red. But then it goes on to say this. Let's pay attention to what's highlighted in red. It says, the dark-skinned Hebrews found great beauty in a clear complexion. Let me read that again. The dark-skinned Hebrews found great beauty in a clear complexion. I'll read it again. The dark-skinned Hebrews found great beauty in a clear complexion. Make a note of that. The dark-skinned Hebrews found great beauty in a clear complexion. All right. So ruddy is simply describing the healthiness of the skin. All right. So Esau was a melanated person. He was a Shakar person. All right. Or should I say Shakawar? So Genesis 10:31. These are the sons of Shem, or Sham, after their families, Mashpakath, after their tongues, Lashan, and their lands, Aratazah. Now, I know some of you guys probably trying to figure out, why are those dots, all right? Why are those dots? Where are those dots from? Why is it underneath the ancient letters there? Well, guess what? That's how it appeared based upon those that are trying to use modern pronunciations on ancient letters. All right. There's no Nakud system with the ancient Paleo. All right. So based upon those markings there, that Nakud system, this word will be pronounced Eretz. All right. Eretz. All right. But in the Paleo, it's Aratazah. All right. So after their nations, let me read this again. These are the sons of Shem or Sham, after their families, Mashpakath, after their tongues, Lashan, and their lands, Aratazah, after their nations. So, what does family, tongues, and land represent? They represent nations. Ga Wayam. You can say Ga Wayam or Ga Yam. Now, let's go to the Oxford Dictionary so we can see if this confirms what I just brought you through. I just gave you a lot of information to further prove who we are, but let's see if this lines up. All right. Oxford Dictionary. Let's see if Oxford Dictionary is going to confirm the word. It says a large body of people united by common descent, history, culture, or language, inhabiting a particular state or territory. Wait a minute. So we see that land, family, tongues, guess what? These are the pillars according to this definition. These are the pillars of what constitutes a nation. It says here, a large body of people, you have to have people to be a nation, united by common descent. Remember, Noah's sons, Japheth, Ham, and Shem, each one of them had their own territories. They had their own territories and they were united based upon their descendants. So united by common descent, history, culture, right? Language, right? What is language? Remember, Lashan, inhabiting a particular state or territory. These are the three pillars of, according to scripture, what constitutes a nation. So I read it again. A large body of people united by common descent, history, culture, or language, right? Inhabiting a particular state or territory. So what does family, Mashpakath, tongues, Lashan, and lands, Aratazah, and nations represent? They represent heritage, Mawar Shah, heritage, Mawar Shah, or Mawar Rasha. They represent heritage. Let's prove this. All right. This is the definition of heritage coming from the Oxford Dictionary. Property that is or may be inherited, and inheritance, valued objects, and qualities such as historic buildings and cultural traditions that have been passed down from previous generations. All right, so now we see that what? Heritage, right, based upon the Oxford Dictionary, right, it is confirming Genesis chapter 10, all right? Property that is or may be inherited, and inheritance, in other words, valued objects and qualities such as historic buildings and cultural traditions that have been passed down from previous generations. All right. So lastly, let's define family. Mashpakath. Let's define family. Mashpakath or Mashpakath. Let's define families. All right, this is coming from the Cambridge Dictionary. It says a social group of parents, children, and sometimes grandparents, uncles, aunts, and others who are related. Okay, so now that we defined families, let's define households, because this is all going to tie in together. Household, bayath. All right, households, bayath. What does household mean? All right. Bayath or Bayith. Bayith is the modern pronunciation, but Bayath, that's what I'm going to stick to, the ancient pronunciation. Bayath, it means a house, right? Especially family, all right? And it goes on to say, as you see highlighted, court, daughter, door, dungeon, family, all right? But nevertheless, let's focus on what's highlighted here. A house, family, Bayath, all right? Now, also what's interesting about Bayath, that is what? The second letter in the Alabat, right? Which is Bayath, which means what? Tent, right? But nevertheless, so we see here Bayath means a house, especially family, all right? So every nation consists of families, and every families consist of tribes, and every tribe consists of households. I'll say that again. Every nation consists of families, and every family consists of tribes, and every tribe consists of households. And every household's foundation is centered around marriage.